Hey everyone, Reed here with Big Strong Book, author of Course of 1,000, now available on Amazon. And today we're talking about The Brutalist. I just got out of it a little while ago and I've got a lot of thoughts. Um, Soon, coming in the near future, will be a couple more book reviews. I'm in the middle of a variety of different works right now, still trying to get through them. It's been a busy last couple months, so apologies for the lack of videos, but what can you do? So, The Brutalist is a movie that's been on my radar pretty much ever since I heard about its premiere. I think it premiered at the Venice Film Festival last fall. Um, and I think I was struck by when I heard the subject matter and then the length of the movie. Those were two things that caught my eye. It is a film or a purported epic about the American dream, and it is 3.5 hours long. Also filmed on 35 mil using the VistaVision process, which hasn't really been used, I want to say, in decades, but I'm not 100% sure on that. Uh, Everything about it just spoke to, this is unfortunately a rarity, a rarity that you get a movie with this much ambition. And then, of course, the question is, does it execute? You can have ambition, but then fall short, which is, that's part and parcel what this movie is about, too. Um, but then I think the budget for The Brutalist was about $10 million, which, if true, is just insane. I don't understand how a movie like this, with the big scale that it has, the length, and then to shoot it on film, and all the actors that you have in it, all the big name actors, and it's only $10 million. Like, that's just very impressive. Um, and I hope leads to more people, uh, more filmmakers to kind of dive in deep to creating projects like this. Not, I mean, of course, not every movie has to be 3.5 hours long, but I think this movie is a testament to having a vision, not compromising on that vision, and being able to pull it off. I think that The Brutalist pulls off just about everything it wants to. I'll just say, kind of right off the bat, I loved this film. It was just absolutely superb. Um, and so I'll dive into a little bit about kind of, what this movie's about in a spoiler-free manner, what I liked about it in a spoiler-free way. And then some aspects of it that I was a little bit confused on, or didn't love as much. Before then, I think diving into more specific spoilers. So, and I'll obviously make a warning when we get to that point. So, this film concerns Laszlo Toth, played by Adrian Brody, a Hungarian architect who emigrates to the U.S. following World War II and the Holocaust, and he struggles to find his footing at first before he kind of catches the attention of a very wealthy businessman, Harrison Lee Van Buren, played by Guy Pearce, who commissions him to essentially design and oversee this significant monument that he feels really passionate about getting done. And so you kind of have these, in a way, almost kindred spirits. You have the gregarious businessman and the gregarious creative. One has the idea and the other is able to build on that idea with the vision, and then they both hope to execute it. Um, but of course, the businessman is, at the end of the day, concerned with the bottom line, whereas the creative wants to create a vision, but one where the ego is removed, which is a very interesting thing. One might think that some, artists create so that their ego might be infused within their work, and that is certainly true for a lot of different, in whatever medium you work in. But then there's also then that's always there to an extent. But then there are the creatives that just want their work to stand on its own. And so Toth is kind of one of these kinds of guys. And so he's dealing with a lot of kind of dark, I mean, insecurities, and he is separated at the start of this movie. He is separated from his wife Erzsébet and their niece Sophia, and they're still kind of stuck in Europe, and they're trying to get to him in America. And at first in the movie, I mean, the so his wife Erzsébet is played by Felicity Jones, and she kind of rounds out like the central trio of the three primary characters. So there's a struggle for her to try to get to her husband in America. So that's kind of, and then this movie takes flight from there. So in a couple different aspects, you've got a few different themes at play here. You have a theme, a general American dream. Okay, so what is the American dream? Well, we think of it as, and of course it's been kind of diluted, perverted, twisted in so many ways over the decades and centuries that I mean, is it even a real thing, right? Like it's almost a myth that still pervades in our society today, that anybody can come from anywhere, from any background, and make it for themselves. Not only make it, but be so successful that they are revered for it. Um, and Laszlo has those ambitions. So this movie is, at first, it's an immigrant story, but what comes along with that is it's an immigrant trying to pursue the American dream, but also the persecution that they face, both literal, but there's also subliminal persecution. Um, Perceived persecution is a big thing, and so you kind of get into then internalizing it after the film, the you know subliminal ways humans can treat one another, not necessarily maybe thinking that they're acting in a certain way, when they actually are. And a lot of it with ego, and then power too. um, it's so that comes into play with Laszlo, and then with Van Buren, his benefactor. And you have that, and then you have the creative side of it. So you have the immigrant story, immigrant, and commentaries on how persecution is dealt with. But then you have that internalization of persecution, both the perceived persecution, maybe persecution that is perceived but may not actually be there, but it's all legitimate to the person dealing with it, even though, again, it may not be actually present. You have that, and then combined with kind of an obsessive creative, which Toth is. He's the immigrant, he's the persecuted immigrant who's fleeing persecution, who has persecution facing him in America, and he perceives himself kind of on this precipice, on this edge, and he feels that there are forces that want to push him over. And it's both true and not true at the same time, but it's just this kind of this rage is then facilitated into his creative endeavors, because he has this immense ambition for the monument that he is tasked with creating, this big community center that's going to be, like, I think at one point he says it's 260,000 square feet, 800,000 square feet in surface area. It's just this massive modernist the brutalist comes from just the brutalist architecture, because he is a brutalist by desire, by discipline, you could even say. Um, but it's how those things are reconciled, how they could destroy an individual, how they could simultaneously build that individual up, and then at the end of the day, the the people that are left over to then view the work, to experience it, and what they take away from it, and both the transformation and the destruction that occurs within the creation of one thing, the transformation and destruction of the work itself, and then of the person. Um, and then what you're left with at the end. So that's what Brady Corbet, the director of this, that's what he goes for. He co-wrote this film with, I believe it's his wife, who's also a director in her own right. Mona Fostvold, I think is her name. So they co-wrote this. Corbet directed it. Corbet, um, a teen actor about 20 years ago who then over the past 10 years has become known for directing. He's directed two films prior to The Brutalist, a film called, I think, The Childhood of a Leader, and then another film with Natalie Portman called, I think, Vox Lux. I might be butchering the pronunciation of that. And The Brutalist has been a labor of love. I mean, it's just, and there's so ironic, the themes of the movie then tie into the meta, I think, of the creation of this, because it's just the way that Corbet, I've seen him describe it in interviews, is that this was just a long, hard fought labor to try to get this made. Um, and then there were, many points where it seemed like it wouldn't happen. And then finally they got the, financial backing, they got a team on board, and they were able to go and make the movie. Um, and I mean, I hadn't seen Corbet's other two films. I will definitely see them in short order now. But I'm excited to see what he will continue to do in the future. He wasn't a director that had been on my radar before this, and so I will definitely be diving into his other work. So yeah, really, really looking forward to that. Um, yeah, so then getting into, I guess, the performances and the technical side. Um, so the performances are just stellar on pretty much every front. Adrian Brody, it's the best I've ever seen him in. Um, Guy Pearce, where's he been? I feel like he's a guy, he's so good. And the same could almost be said for Adrian Brody. I feel like it's just far and few between where he's given these opportunities to shine. Same with Guy Pearce. Adrian Brody, I mean, he had The Pianist, he had The Grand Budapest Hotel, um, and then you have Guy Pearce, who had things like Memento, but that was now a quarter of a century ago. Um, and he really hasn't been given, I think, the great opportunities, or at least more recognized opportunities to kind of let his acting flag fly. Um, and then you have Felicity Jones, who is also great, almost in a more reserved manner in this. Um, but she's absolutely solid. Then you have, I think, Alessandro Nivola, who's been in a variety of things. I mean, I know him most from being playing Nicolas Cage's brother in Face Off. He's wonderful in this as Toth's cousin, but he's barely in the movie, and I kind of shocked of how his character just kind of comes and goes, and that was a little bit of a shame. Honestly, I wanted to see more of him. And then and this may tie into more of the writing side of it, but then you have, I think, Joe Alwyn is his name, who plays he's the son of Guy Pearce's character, and he's the good as an actor. I think my gripes with that character might have more to do with the writing than anything else. Um, so again, this film is 3.5 hours long, 3 hours 35 minutes, but fortunately that includes a 15-minute intermission, which it really helped. Like this movie, I think because of the intermission, it flows so quickly. It doesn't feel like it's 3.5 hours long. I think it's great that it's built into the film where you have a 15-minute intermission, a time to kind of step away, internalize what you've experienced for the past, hour and a half, hour, 40 minutes, and then go into the second half. And one thing that I kind of knew before going into this, I had seen I tried to stay away from it so I could have a fresh perspective and opinion, but I had seen a lot of people online who said, part one is phenomenal, it's fantastic, and then people thinking that part two, it either uh, maybe slightly goes off the rails, or it just kind of feels rushed, or it doesn't or things don't feel justified. And I came out of the film and I was in, I think, disagreement to that. I enjoyed the movie in its entirety, not just like part one versus part two. I loved it all. Even the epilogue, which I'll get into uh, more in the spoilers section of this. Um, so then other technical aspects. So boy, is it wonderful to see film grain. Even though I think in the theater I saw it and it was projected, it was a digital projection. I unfortunately don't live anywhere near, uh, you know, a 70 millimeter projector. That I know is Corbet. What he has said is his preferred viewing experience for this film is to see it projected in 70 millimeter. It was not shot on 70 millimeter, but that's nowhere near me, and filmed projections of movies don't happen often near where I am or anywhere it seems, which is again a shame. But because the process that was shot on, I love that you still see the grain. It's not like they tried to like digitally remove it away, and that makes you just generally feel nostalgic. I know I do. It was just wonderful to see that. Pairing along with that, the cinematography is just it's beautiful. Kind of the lightness of the colors at play. Again, a lot of plays on light blues and deep blues. I think that was one thing that I really appreciated about it. And then again, the production design side of it. Again, how did they do this for $10 million? Creating a period piece that's pretty much entirely set within the 40s and 50s. How do you do that? How do you do that? For that, because I would have thought that a movie like this would have cost at least 50 or 60 million, at least that much. Maybe talking $100 million. But the fact that it could do that for a tiny fraction of that, again, I hope that this brings good tidings of great joy for the film industry moving forward. So I'll get into a little bit more specific spoiler things now, kind of pertaining to aspects, things within the second half of the film. Because even though, again, I love this film, I would highly recommend anybody out there, if it's showing near you, go see it, go support it. I mean, not just for the fact that it's wonderful that films like this can be made, but that it's a great movie too, that I feel like ought to be experienced by everybody on the big screen. It's rare that we get movies like this anymore. Movies on this scale, movies that are this good on this scale. And yeah, I think everybody, should do themselves a favor and see this movie. But the like maybe like the minor quibbles and gripes that I have with this do relate to the second half, similar to, I think, the criticisms that others have leveled against this movie. Which again, it's been immense praise, but the criticism has been for specific things in part two. Which I'll get into now. So again, love this film. Recommend anybody go see it if it's showing near you. I guess before we get into spoilers, A24's rollout of this film has been a little bit disappointing. I wish it was showing more widely. I think they're waiting for when the Oscar nominations inevitably come out. I think next week this will be nominated for I think at least 10. But it I just, yeah, I think I wish that they was showing more widely. So, anyways, love this movie. Go see it. Spoilers now. So, spoilers from here on out. The gripes I had with part two, I think that, minor quibbles. I think while I loved the characterization and the arcs, all told, of the central three characters, Laszlo, Erzsébet, and Van Buren. I I think that the son, Van Buren's son, I don't. It's not a discredit to the actor Joe Alwyn. I think it's more of a. I think he's a little too one note for me. A little too. a little too much of a prick, if that makes sense. Uh, Again, it's just it's one note, one dimensional a little bit with him, with a hint at a deeper thing kind of throughout, but not enough. I needed more from him. And again, Attila, Alessandro Nivola's character, I was expecting him to show up in part two, and he didn't, and that was a little bit surprising and a little bit disappointing. I think they really could have used him in there. I think everything with kind of the shape that Laszlo takes as he grows more fearful, more obsessive, thinking that he has come to this place, he's come to America, and he has to, because it didn't, he has to make make a statement for himself, even though he had that recognition in Europe. He doesn't want to come across as a failure. He doesn't want any type of things to kind of cut away at his vision, and then he grows again, just more uh, obsessive, controlling, domineering, and that starts to play into how he interacts with others, in particular his wife. And then the self-destructive habits. I mean, he's a heroin addict, which is portrayed as something where it seems legitimate that he started using opiates and then for pain and then transitioned to heroin. Um, that I think ties in really well, especially with this era of that creative tendencies. I mean, I think I tie heroin use in the 50s to jazz, and maybe it's on the nose, I don't know, but there's that scene in part one where him and his friend Gordon, another kind of a little underutilized character, um, they go to a jazz club and they shoot up afterwards. So that kind of ties into what I almost associate kind of the creative the creative self-destructives bent towards heroin abuse in the 50s. I tie that a lot to the jazz greats of the day, which was just, I mean, with the stress, with the just kind of constant go 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 go, they fall into that. And then with Laszlo kind of almost hooking his wife on it at the end was a tragic uh, foretelling that I mean, you could see it coming. I thought that there were things that I'm glad that they didn't do in part two. I'm glad that they didn't. I thought that he was going to give her heroin and then she would die, and that, and she doesn't. It's probably more tragic that she lives and that she likes it, or at least that's hinted at. I also like that at the way end, or at least before the epilogue, when Erzsébet kind of comes into the Van Buren mansion and confronts Van Buren for raping her husband, and then he disappears. And at first, I thought he was going to go to the monument under construction, and he would they would find him with a self-inflicted gunshot wound on the altar. Again, that would have been a little too easy, a little too on the nose, but they didn't. It leaves kind of his fate ambiguous as they're all trying to search for him, and I liked that. So then tying into the reason why that last scene happens. So the what's being talked about is the rape scene that occurs in the film, where Van Buren, he rapes Laszlo when they're overseas in Italy trying to figure out a marble shipment for the monument, and he does it in a way, it's things like that, they can happen for the shock value. This didn't have that. I think the dialogue of Guy Pearce's character during that scene was a little too much on the nose. It's like, okay, we get it. So there's a little bit of a gratuitous nature with it, um, it didn't. I'd say take me out of it. I didn't feel like, okay, why are you're just doing this for the shock value or anything. Again, it ties into they're like Van Buren and Toth are these kind of twisted kindred, unfortunate kindred spirits in a way of their self-destructive habits. And then at the end, so we jump way ahead in the future into the 80s, where there's this exhibition in Venice for Toth's work. It is shown in that epilogue that he had what seems like a successful career after the Van Buren Monument, building all sorts of structures in the U.S. Now, some people didn't like the epilogue because it explained things a little too much, or it left a lot to be desired. I loved the epilogue when all was said and done, um, because it really rips into, I guess, the fraught, or um, the almost that creative energies and creative endeavors can ultimately be meaningless. Like, you have the object, was it worth it? And but the or that if transformation can't be shown, truly shown, in the work. So he's at this exhibition for himself, and his niece speaks, um, and she then talks about how this Van Buren monument, tied into his uh, times and traumatic times in concentration camps during the Holocaust. And but I wonder if that's even true, because throughout the whole film, we never see that with Toth. We never see him thinking about it or explaining, this is why I'm doing what I'm doing, or this is what this project, this monument means for me. Um, I think that the ending, when his niece says that about his work, it's almost as if she might just be putting in her own input, or what she views it as. It might not be what he views it as. And when she says, quoting him, when that he apparently told her that it is only, like, the destination is the only thing that's worth it, not the journey itself. But yet the journey would not have had this immense both triumph and so Laszlo simultaneously has the triumph and the destruction. He has both. He comes out on top at the end of the day, but then it's ironic to then have his niece, and crushing for him to have his niece say that the destination is worth it, even though that's something that he said. Did he really mean that? I don't think he did. And one thing that is always kind of hammered in throughout the course of the film is characters desiring to, create something that, while at the same time looking to the past, looks to the future. Van Buren says that, looking to the future. Brutalist architecture, in a way, was kind of a step out of Art Deco and other traditions that had come before it. And yet, what do we broadly, as a society, maybe view brutalist architecture as today? Closed off, suffocating, unappealing. We might view it. What I mean, individual opinions differ. I mean, I'm honestly not a fan of brutalist architecture, and it's kind of faded away. We don't really have that as much anymore. It's a product of its time, and yet I don't think we view it as fondly or have a desire to dissect it more. So you have this object that is created, but then generations afterwards, there's just a disassociation, both by time, but then by lack of interest, and almost by a disgust towards it. Again, ironic that this epilogue is then set in Venice, which has some of the most iconic and beautiful architecture of human history that is still marveled after, is still loved and cherished, even though, again, when you get down to the individual opinions, it might differ. But you have that, which Laszlo lacks. So he both triumphs and he both kind of self-destructs internally, kind of through this creative process of getting this monument done that ultimately isn't completed until like over a decade later, as we're then told in the epilogue. And you'll these creatives at the end of the day will have somebody tell their story that may not be their intention in how they created something or why they created something, but you will not get, the creative will not get the voice, the ultimate voice at the end of the day. They won't get the say, because future generations will, and future generations will kind of come into it with their own biases and their own perceptions that could completely disfigure what the original intent was. But also, there might not be a desire. That's another thing, too, that's probably more crushing is a lack of interest, a lack of desire, but that it's always something in the past. It's always something to be almost nostalgic or quaintly remembered rather than something that is alive. So I love that about the epilogue. And then kind of the almost the middle finger that Corbet gives, because the movie ends with the disco song one for you, one for me, which is something that I feel like is so often said in the film industry. You do one for them and then you do one for you. And it's Corbet kind of bucking that. And he is not in agreement with what his own character says of the destination is the only thing that's worth it. The journey doesn't really matter, it's the destination. He disagrees. He says journey and destination are inseparable. They are imperative, and you can't have these compromises. So he's sympathetic towards Laszlo, but I feel like Courbet is also realistic in how he depicts those intense creative energies ultimately spill over into kind of a hollowing of the self. So again, that's just my take, kind of fresh out of the theater. So for what it's worth, which might not be anything. So Brutalist, again, I love this film. I recommend anybody go see it if it's near you. Support it not only because of just the scope of this, but it's also great. That makes it all worth it in the end. And yeah, looking forward to visiting Courbet's other films, and then with what his hopefully long career ahead of him has to offer. So if you've seen The Brutalist, let me know what you think, and I will see you guys next time.